Now, South Africa's mobile phone charges are the third highest in the world, and that's after Mexico and Turkey. And of course, interconnect fees are now under the spotlight in South Africa. Government has stepped in, and something that many people said that ICASA should have actually done quite some time ago. Just taking a look at the recent developments, that interconnect fees need to be slashed by the end of November. And of course, the mobile operators coming out and saying that if the interconnect fees are slashed, they will be forced to increase rates elsewhere.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously they use it as funding mechanisms for rural development, and that's been their argument, you know. So obviously, I think if you put the ball in their court at this point right now, they'll say, okay, well, there'll be less of that. So South Africa's economic development will be hampered slightly if you reduce interconnect rates dramatically. They've been mum on kind of what the actual costs are between the networks, and I guess that's within their right. It's interesting that you say we've got the third highest interconnect fees and we compare favorably with Turkey and Mexico, because, you know, I would be more expecting, say, perhaps Vietnam and Thailand, whereas in those parts of the world, interestingly, they've got fairly low interconnect rates and people push through a lot of voice traffic. So it's interesting how post this, people's bills, people might say, oh, gee, I'm saving 200 Rand on my mobile bill, and interestingly stump that up over time. But it also falls back to where are we in the bigger picture? I get really frustrated when people say, I'm completely annoyed with my cell phone provider. Because let's put this into context. It's 15 years old, you know, and the old ones were huge bricks we used to carry around. Now you can bank on your mobile, standing in the queue wherever. You can get movie tickets, you can do whatever you want. So I think it's evolved very quickly, and maybe the interconnect fees were too high, and maybe we were only expecting the interconnect fees to impact the high-end users, because initially when Eleni Giokos at Vodacom was asked how many subscribers do you think you're going to get, I think he said South Africa has space for about 250,000. And of course, we know that's, you know, the rest is history.
Well, what's interesting to note, Sasha, a study in 24 countries showed that a 10% cut in interconnection fees was followed by a 10% average rise in retail call rates. So it's quite interesting to note that. Do you think that we're going to have a rise in retail call rates? Because obviously the likes of MTN has come out and said a cut in interconnect fees is obviously going to be a big business shock.
Yeah, I think so. But, you know, that's why we've always enjoyed MTN as an investment vehicle rather than Vodacom. And to be fair, the only way you could really buy Vodacom in the past was through Telkom. But it's interesting that ICASA has been showed up here as being completely useless, you know, to put it mildly, and that the government's had to step in and do something about it, simply because I do agree. If you're able to communicate, and small business people only use their mobile phones for communication. You can see it in the Telkom data that they're losing on the fixed line business. But it almost smacks of like cronyism that this is only brought to the fore when Telkom have dispersed of their Vodacom stake or unbundled their Vodacom stake. So that's the only thing that seems a little bit sour for me.
And I think you mentioned Eleni Giokos as well, former CEO of Vodacom. He also came out and said after he left Vodacom that interconnect fees were far too high. And recently he's also said that operators would not suffer financially if interconnect fees were reduced. Exactly, because if it's cheaper in your pocket and you were using 500 Rand and suddenly it's fallen to 400 Rand, my guess is that it doesn't take long for your bill to get back to 500 Rand. So it might actually see more push through. So I think everybody has a point, and I think MTN's argument is that don't do a once-off shock, rather do it gradually over a period of the year, 18 months. Well, Sasha, give us some insights into the numbers and who's going to actually benefit. I think the parties that will be most affected will be in this order: Vodacom, MTN, and then of course Cell C, because simply it's about who has the most traffic on your network. So in terms of subscriber numbers, Vodacom has more than MTN, and then further down the feeding chain like Telkom, like Cell C, in terms of who actually does the switching. So, you know, if you look at it simply, I think MTN gets in 5.8 billion. At the last reporting season, pays out, I think it was 4.2, but I could be standing under correction. So that gives you a size and scale.
And remember, that's at the R1.25 level. So if it's dropped to 60 cents, that means they'll be paying away less, but also getting in less. So as a percentage, it's probably somewhere in the region of 30% more that they get in than they get out.
Well, it's quite interesting to note that you mentioned that Telkom owned part of Vodacom, and when it owned part of Vodacom, ICASA and government didn't really push for these kind of changes in interconnect fees. Why do you think they were so mum then? Was it just about the profits?
Yeah, it's probably because you own nearly a 40% stake in Telkom, you know. It's interesting for me in a world of choices, why I've never liked Telkom. Simply because management looked like a bunch of mugs next to the mobile companies, and that's being frank. They've made some disastrous mistakes. Telkom Media, you know, they flushed R1 billion down the toilet, and here they sit with all this cash on hand, a little bit less than 10 billion rands, and their market cap is 22, and people are giving them an 8 times multiple, earnings multiple. So to me, it kind of indicates that the market's not exactly comfortable with the position. Plus that multi-links business, which they sunk a lot of money into.
Sasha, just very quickly, would you be staying away from MTN now that the Bharti deal has, of course, come to an end, and also the fact that these interconnect fees will be slashed and margins will come under pressure?
No, because I think ultimately it's about being in a mobile company. We've got high margins, operate in 21 different geographies. We've got some of the smartest management around in the South African corporate context, have grown really rapidly. And I think they're going to start to eat the likes of Telkom's business over the years.